Okay, good evening, everybody. Hopefully we're all safe and warm in our homes because it's or cooler or something.
In a second.
Yes. So unfortunately, a very timely topic, and that is Jews and war. Uh, Hopefully, again, as we continue to daven, there should be peace in Eretz Yisrael, that this should remain a theoretical discussion. Okay, so let's jump right in. Everyone, you guys have the source sheet? It's in the chat. You got it? I'll just take that as a yes because nobody's responding. Somebody put up a finger. You have a source sheet? Pretty sure I hit send. Go to the chat. It's sitting there. In the chat, there is a source sheet.
Got it.
Got it. Excellent. All right. All right. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna start with the Mishnah. I want to try and pick apart the Mishnah, and then we will move from there. Again, please don't be frightened. There's just no English for any of the other sources, so we won't do most of them inside. They're just there for anyone whose Hebrew is good enough and you want to read it. And maybe I'll read little snippets. But the Mishnah, so this is 29a. It's Rosh Hashanah Chav Testament Aleph. And the Mishnah is talking about a very famous scene from the book of Shmos. Right after we have the water test and the Jews complain they don't have water, right? So we go to war with Amalek, right? Moshe charges Yehoshua to go to war with Amalek. They go ahead and do that, and then the Torah describes that when Moshe's hands are raised, they're victorious. When he puts his hands down, they are not. So that's the background for this Mishnah. The Mishnah says as follows. Right, Vayak Hasher Yarim Moshe v'Gavar Yisrael. That's a quote from the pasuk. I think it's the 19th chapter of Shemot, but don't quote me on that. Right, when Moshe would raise his hands v'Gavar Yisrael, and here the Mishnah asked the obvious question: V'chiyadav shel Moshe osos milchama o shovros milchama. Right, do the outstretched raised arms of Moshe Rabbeinu? Do they make a war, literally make or break a war, right? Osot or shavrot, do they make a war or break a war? Right? And the answer is, of course not. That's ridiculous. What makes a war? If you hit the target, bullets, missiles, defense, right? And that's what makes a war. It's not Moshe on the sideline raising his hands. And therefore, the Mishnah says, second line, Ela lomar lecha, to teach you, shekol zman shehayu Yisrael mistaklin klape mala, anytime the Jews would look towards the heavens, i.e., direct tfilos to Hashem, right, or at least gaze towards the heavens, umishabdin es liban la'avinu shebashamayim, they make their hearts subservient to their Father in heaven, hayu miskabrin. Right, then they would be successful in war. The imlav, how you know from them, if not, they would fall, which means they are fighting this war. And if they have good intentions, they look to the heaven, they're good Jews, they'll be successful. If they're not, right, so then we have a problem. That's line number one in the Mishnah. Line number two, or not line, but item number two, kiyotze bedavar. Right, similarly, ata omer. That is, we're jumping to the book of Bamidbar. Right, there is a plague, and the Moshe Rabbeinu takes this as the copper snake. Actually, Hashem says a snake. Moshe says make it copper. For homework, you can figure out why Moshe did that. Took the initiative. But there's this snake that Moshe puts on his staff. It is very similar to the doctor's symbol today, but not exact. That's further homework as well if you want in that story. There are slight differences between, what do we call that thing on the doctor's coat?
Caduceus.
The doctors are jumping up and telling Eve how to pronounce this right, but I wasn't even close, so it's okay. Right?
Not for me.
Yes, there are slight differences between that and the Nachash HaNachoshet, but not for today, right? So if they look at it, they were healed. Right? Anyone who was bitten sees this snake on a pole and is healed. And the Mishnah asks, "V'china nachash meimid or nachash mechayeh?" Right? Is it the snake that put someone to death? I mean, not the snake that bites you, but the snake on the stick, on the staff. Right? Is that what kills you, or that what is mechayeh? What will bring you back to life? What will heal you? And the answer, obviously, to that is of course not. That's silly. Ella, bisman she Yisrael mistaklin klape mala. When the Jews look towards heaven, and they direct their hearts to our Father in heaven, they were healed. Being lav, they would fade away. Right? Shrivel, whatever the. Now, that's number two. So number one is the war with Amalek, Moshe's hands. Number two, the Jews are saved by looking at the copper serpent on the rod. And then we say Cheresh Shota V'Katan, right? A Cheresh is a deaf mute. A Shota is someone who does not have their mental faculties with them. V'Katan is a child, right? We don't assume in halacha that a child has requisite knowledge. Ein Motziin es harabim yidei chovasan. They cannot fulfill the rabbim, the regular people, the people not in that category, right, of their obligation in ostensibly shofar. Klal, here's the rule: Kol she'enu mechuyev b'davar, anyone who is not obligated in the item, like a cheresh shota v'katan, right, eno motzi es harabim yidei chovasan, they cannot help others fulfill their obligation. I have a number of questions. I'd like to actually try and flesh them out with you before we go on. So again, three parts of the Mishnah. Moshe's hands, war with Amalek, serpent on the staff, right? Live or die when you're looking after you were bitten. And then a halachic piece about who is obligated and who can be motzi, who can help others fulfill their obligation. I want to ask you first, what's the relationship between A and B? Between Moshe's hands in war and the staff on the stick? Are they the same or not? Are there differences? And then we'll go and see, is there a relationship between A, B, and C? Right? Between staff on the stick, or Moshe's hands, snake on the staff, and on the one hand, and this last piece about being motzi other people and who's obligated. So let's start with A and B. Are they the same? Are they different?
The same,
The same. Okay, why?
because the whole idea is to look up.
So they certainly have that in common, 1000%. Are there differences in those two cases? Sid is right. There certainly is a commonality, no question. Language in the Mishnah is the same idea, 100%.
Well,
Eva's thinking. Eva's
I'm
going to tell.
thinking, yeah.
Eva.
For one thing, the serpent, especially cast out of bronze, makes me think of idols because it's a cast figure.
Okay.
I think it's copper.
A
Not
copper,
flash, the flash out.
copper brush, whatever.
Assignment number one.
Okay.
Done.
And just thinking of the image, Moshe is raising his hands towards heaven, but I'm hoping that the people are not looking at him to remember to think of heaven. Because when you're at war and you look like this, that's when someone slices your throat. So.
Okay, so I think we're on the right track. Somebody sharpen that. By the way, did anyone hear that? Can everyone hear Eve? Yes?
Yeah.
Yes, good, perfect. All right, the speaker's working. Let's see if we can sharpen that for that difference, right? Because what Eve said is, if you're looking up at the staff, at Moshe's hands while you're at war, the enemy is going to blow your brains out. Now, in the old days, they wouldn't blow your brains out, but they would slit your throat because they didn't have guns, but they might have had knives. Okay, what does that imply? And here, I think is the difference. Well, by the way, anyone else want to take a stab at it before I reformulate? But I think that's right.
What is a
concerned with leadership on the part of Moshe and a teaching opportunity. The other one is an item of participation, and the two are interconnected in the success or failure of war.
Okay. It's almost like we're dancing around the most simple fundamental part, because I agree with that too, and I agree with Eve.
One is just the hands, the other one is an object. There's a
Okay,
difference.
where
Mhm.
Well,
So
but
that- now-
war and a plague brought by God are also not identical.
that war and a plague brought by God are not identical. That's correct. So Eve has now said two things that I'm going to try and reformulate into one. Okay, and that is the Nachash HaNachoshet is purely mystery. It is purely miracle. There is nothing rational or natural about being healed by staring at a staff with a snake curled around it. As far as I know, I might be wrong, right? And as opposed to war, that's what I really meant to get to. I think all the other distinctions were right, but not what I was looking for. 100% correct. Is war simply miraculous?
Or
Someone wins, someone loses.
Someone wins and someone loses, but is war simply miraculous? No. Right? And that's when you talk about participation, when we talk about having your throat slit. It's a natural. I mean, if I can paraphrase what you were saying, if I'm not saying what you're saying, just tell me. But you
Good.
right, right. Meaning it's a natural war, and if we look up, we're successful. Right? It's not that Hashem is fighting the war for us, or that Moshe's hands, right? The chiyad of Shemose Oshev Machama. Moshe's hands don't do war. Who does war? We do. How do we know if we'll be successful? We have the right intentions. If we're looking at Hashem, again, not figurative, not literally. Right? If we go in as servants of Hashem, we fight a war, but we will be successful. But we must fight the war. Right? The Mishnah assumes as foolish that all you have to do is raise your hands and you win the war. That's rejected out of hand as utter nonsense. Right? The Mishnah is so obvious that doesn't even entertain it. It has to give a different answer. Right? Because one could have said, yes, with my Gemara in hand, I sit in the Beis Medrash, and that wins the war. No, we're not going to, well, maybe we will go there. But anyways, right, we go to war, and Yeshua took the people to war. Moshe's hands don't win the war. Our kavana is helpful in determining whether we win the war or not, but we better fight that war, or Eve is right, they will come and slit our throats, right? That's what I mean. It's a natural fight.
It's something you have to be doing.
Right? So that I think is certainly a difference, or maybe there's no difference. I guess that's what we have to play out. That's what we'll flesh out tonight, right? Is war the same as the Nachash HaNechoshet, the copper serpent? That it's just this magical, mystical, miraculous event, which again, mind you, from where we're sitting, if that was okay, that'd be really nice right now. I would take it. But sadly, I'll give away the answer before I start, and you all know where I'm going anyways. It's not our reality. We wish that were true, that we can just look up at I was I was trying to think of somebody in the government, but let's try and choose a rabbi. Okay, right, let's try and choose somebody else. But let's say we could look at Rav Rimon's raised hands, or, who by all accounts is a stellar Jew, right? And just look at his hands and we'd win the war, it'd be so nice. But maybe is that what the Mishnah means, or is it different? And I think that certainly is part of the challenge in the discussion. Now, what's also fascinating, what was that? Was that you? Oh, that was me. Just make sure it's not any of my children. Okay. Sorry, my eyes are on my phone now all the time with the kids in Israel. So I apologize. If we take a step back, and this will help us with the connection between A and B and C, right? What have we been talking about in the Gemara until now? Right, being Yotze, different types of shofar, we ask ourselves a fundamental question about this Mishnah, and that is, what in the world is it doing here? This Mishnah does not belong anywhere in Rosh Hashanah. Has nothing to do with shofar, has nothing to do with kavana, has nothing to do with being motzi, has nothing to do with anything. Why is this Mishnah here? That's a very good question. It's actually a really good question. I mean, where would you put it? The answer is nowhere. I don't think I'd put it anywhere in the Mishnah. Okay, you stick it in the Gemara somewhere in some Agadata, it's nice. Right? It belongs in some Agadic session of the Gemara, not in a Mishnah. Right? It's strange to have it in a Mishnah. There's very little Agadic material in a Mishnah at all. There's a little bit here and there, but not a lot. And we're in the middle of, I mean, right? We're in Rosh Hashanah. All right, so now what's the answer to that question? I'll give you a hint. It goes back to what Sid said before.
We have to know who's going to help us be successful. We can't do it.
No, I mean, what's the connection between that and being motzi somebody in mitzvot?
Moshe is having his hands raised, or
Right.
I don't know, Aaron walked with the staff. I don't remember who walked.
Moshe had the staff.
Moshe had the staff. He having the staff is not going to do it alone. It was the
Right.
people who had to do it. So he could not be Mechuyev, but they were not in that kind of category of others.
Right. They were not. So okay, one answer. Anybody else? Right. So now let's ask ourselves the question, right? Why is it that, and this will inform us maybe on how we perform the mitzvot, right? I'll follow up on what Jeff said. Why can't the Cheresh, Shota, and Katan, right? Why can't they help us fulfill our obligation? Right? Maybe because they can't have the right kavana. They don't have the mindset to have the proper kavana. Right? And now we say to ourselves, and this will actually go back directly to the Gemara before, not the Gemara, the Mishnah and discussions beforehand. When we pick up a shofar, we blow the shofar. If we blow it and we don't have the right kavana, what is that worth?
Not much.
Not much. If we go to war and we don't have the right kavana, what is that worth? Not much. If we look at the serpent on the staff and we don't have the right kavana, what is that worth? Not much. Right? What the Maharsha says this. Again, I'm not going to read it inside because I try not to read sources that we don't have English for, but I do like you to have the sources. But the Maharsha, again, Rabbi Shmuel Adels, again, lived in one of the great Polish rabbis. So this is in his commentary to the Gemara. He has a commentary on the halacha and a commentary on the Agada, right? On the non-halachic material, this is a commentary on the Agada. And he essentially says that when we perform the mitzvos, of course we perform an action, but without the proper kavana, that action is essentially meaningless. Now, what's fascinating is the Pnei Yehoshua is Rabbi Yehoshua Falk, who lives a little bit later, also in Poland. We had such tremendous history in Poland until they wiped us all out. But there were good 500 years. Some of the most tremendous rabbis in the world lived in Poland. Imagine what Poland would be now if they kept their Jews. Scary thought. World power. But these were. Right, so he says. Remember, we had an argument about whether mitzvahs require kavana or not.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
Who does this explanation of the mission and this connection? Who does that work for? Who does it not work for?
It's a striras kavana, obviously.
Right. Obviously, it only works if mitzvahs require kavana. What if mitzvahs don't require kavana? Then you have to fall back and say, mitzvahs don't require kavana is only a b'di'evet. But really, everyone agrees that, of course, you should have kavana. But it does work better, right? Pnei Yehoshua says it certainly does work better if you believe that mitzvahs require kavana. Okay, so now we are on the second page. Oh, okay. Let's jump to the And I reordered them and I totally messed it up. Okay. The Morome Sada on the top should actually be the third source. So I'll just I want to go back to that question of is because this to me is the more interesting question than what's it doing here. No, it's a very good question. Right? Is war miraculous or is war natural? What's the ideal? How does it work? Now we have to always remember that people writing in a time when they couldn't conceive of Jewish war, tend sometimes towards the non-natural because they didn't have a conception of what it meant to be Jews fighting a natural war. If you are a Kabbalist, then all bets are off. So Rabbi Menachem Rikenati. So that's the second source, really should be the first source. He is a great Kabbalist, I believe lived in the 15th century in Italy. He is, along with Rabbeinu Bachaya, one of the people who tries to give some understanding to the Ramban, to Nachmanides' Kabbalistic understanding of the Chumash. If you want your head to spin without any alcohol or drugs at all, read a lot of Rabbi Menachem Rikenati. It's when I went, actually, I thought I funny. So when I went to Gush, when Avi and Ariel were Shana Aleph and Shana Bet, so I went for a week to learn with them. Right, that was a great week. Learn with both of your boys. So I must have had a troubling Ramban where I was trying to understand. Right, sometimes the Ramban will give you the pshat and they'll tell you derech hasod or derech haemet, right, the secret or the truth, and that's when you know you're in trouble. Right, the Art Scroll Ramban actually does not translate at all. They just leave it an empty space. This is beyond our. So I asked for Moshe Lichtenstein. I said, like, does anyone understand this at all? Or is this like something we should just give up on, say goodbye? Like we just, flip the switch and be done. So he said he actually made reference to Rabbeinu Bachaya and the Rekanati who do try and explicate some of what the Ramban tried to hide. The Ramban did try to hide, and he says it in his introduction to Chumash. He tries to hide his Kabbalistic methodology. And then he told me that he remembered learning with his grandfather, the Rav, and when he learned with the Rav had enough background in Kabbalah and was smart enough to decipher, the Ramban's Kabbalah. And I actually went with Avi and we spent 15 minutes learning two things that I've forgotten since then because my memory is terrible. But he remembered from when he learned with the Rav. All right, so again, everything in here, that's just the background to understand that this is, if you're expecting a rational explanation, don't look in Rikanati. But what does he say? Why does Moshe raise his hands? It's not just a pointing to Hashem. How many fingers do you have? Hopefully 10. How many spheros do we have? Right, heavenly Kabbalistic realms, or Godheads, or whatever we want to call them. Take a guess. 10. That's a good guess. Very good. In which case, what is Moshe doing with his 10 fingers?
He's uniting the heavens.
He
Uniting.
is uniting them. He is by Yashpiu. He's having influence on the heavenly realms and the Godheads, and in that way, he is affecting war. And if we could do that, that would be very cool.
If we had emotion.
Maybe we could, right?
But
But
it wasn't just motivational, the people seeing it.
no, this was, but again,
Spirited so that they would.
that is the Kabbalistic worldview, right? The Kabbalistic worldview, and this is about all I know about Kabbalah. So you're going to get everything I know about Kabbalah in about 30 seconds right now. And that is, it's the mitzvahs require kavana, I don't require kavana, idea that certain actions literally impact the celestial world, and that comes back around to us. Right, the Arizal was so particular about the specifics of his siddur because he believed that it wasn't the intention of the davener, but the words that are uttered somehow impact the heavens just by being uttered. Right, that's not the Judaism we're used to, but that is a Kabbalistic thought. Right, most Kabbalah is not actually about turning people into frogs or doing crazy things. It's a way of understanding Hashem in the world, right? So actions, mitzvot, they're done and they impact the celestial heavens, and it reverberates back to this earth in ways that I cannot fathom or comprehend. But if that's the truth, then Moshe raising his hands and doing something with the spheros, so that's very impressive. That is how war is waged, if that is indeed the case.
It-
Everybody else assumes that war is waged naturally, with divine assistance, but war is waged naturally. And I want to give you two fascinating examples. One is, so there's a compilation of ideas on the Gemara that's found on the Bar-Ilan on the thumb drive. It's called Daf al-Hadaf. It's like a page on the page. I don't know, that's a dumb title, but it's a great commentary. I would choose a different name for it, something a little more catchy, but nobody asked me. Daf al-Hadaf, but it's kind of like, what does that mean? Page on the page? I don't know. It doesn't do it for me, but it's brilliant. So he quotes Yerushalmi, right? That if you look on the second line, right? I'll just read that one line. It's the second line. It's the third word. The tzitz mo'il levatel kochot shel kshafim. Right. So he thought that Amalek worked through magic. Shafim is magic, and that the tzitz that the Kohen Gadol wore had the power to annul the power of magic. Okay, let's just take that as a given for right now. Okay, let's not question that. Let's run with this. Okay, if that is true, by the way, who was the Kohen Gadol at the time in Shmos? In Shmos, that's why I said Shmos, not in Kohen Gadol until the end of the Miluim is Moshe Rab. Right, Moshe. That's why I said Shmos and not Vayikra. Right, that was the hint. It's Moshe Rabbeinu. Therefore, who was wearing the tzitz? Possibly
Moshe.
Rabbeinu. Now, you gotta just work with me on this. That's actually true. That's not disputable. That's true, right? There is also a halacha in the Gemara in Sota, which of course Moshe Rabbeinu knew. But once we suspend disbelief, it's all fabulous. Third line, Ein lahagbiat ha'adayim l'mala min hatzitz. You cannot raise your hands. The Kohen Gadol cannot raise his hands above that. Again, the tzitz is the tiara, is such a strange name for it, but it's a head plate.
Headband.
Head plate, good, right? Tiara would make it Isha. That'd be so bad, right? But Kohen Gadol couldn't wear a tiara; it'd be very bad. So we don't do that. But Moshe, right? You can't raise your hands above the tzitz, above this, headband, because it has Hashem's name written on it. Now, let's bring it back. Why does Moshe raise his hands above his head? To show that he's not wearing what? The tzitz. In which case, what's not going to happen? A miraculous war. The magic won't be right. And therefore, what are they going to have to do?
Right.
They're going to have to daven. Right? They're going to have to go to war, and they're going to have to daven. They're going to have to do it naturally. So that's a fascinating. It was a little convoluted, I know. We had to get there, but once we got there, essentially what the Yerushalmi says is Moshe raises his hands as a signal to the people. This is not Kriyas Yamsuf anymore, where Hashem just takes the strong hand and the outstretched arm, and whoosh, the water splits, and then boom, it comes back on. This is a different kind of war, and Moshe indicates that to the people by raising his hands. Okay, that is cool source number one.
This was already in creation. It was already being used. I mean, I thought that comes later.
I said you have to suspend your.
No. I'm just curious. That was Moshe.
Because that came with Vayikra.
Yes,
I'm just trying to figure
well,
out.
that came in the end of Shmos.
Yeah.
But yes, this Yerushalmi is assuming that it was. Right? But Steve's point is a good point, which is why before I said you suspend your disbelief. Right? I'm more interested, by the way, in what the Yerushalmi means, because Steve's question is a very good question. Right? But irrelevant because how do I say this without sounding like a heretic? Because the Yerushalmi is not really interested in what's happening in the Chumash, right? The Yerushalmi is telling us about war and how they view war, and it seems like they're kind of just imposing it back on this very cool Moshe story, raising his hands. Because otherwise, Steve's question destroys this story. The tzitz is not yet created. It's unclear that thing that you can't raise your hand above the tzitz It's not in the Chumash. There's a lot of holes in the story, but the perspective of the Yerushalmi is what's interesting to me. The perspective of the Yerushalmi is Moshe is saying in the beginning of their journey, not even later on, we go to war and we fight like people. And we daven like HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem should help us. Right? If you don't daven like HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that you should help us, and you don't have the right kavanos don't mean, and therefore I don't have to fight. It means that we'll be successful in our fight. Right? And that is what the Yerushalmi is saying. The other source, which is another great source, and that is the Netziv. So let me just give you just the different commentaries. On the top of the page, top of the second page, the Merome Sadeh, again, the Netziv Naftali to Yehuda Berlin, the last Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin, 19th century in Europe. Merome Sadeh is his commentary to the Gemara. He'emek Davar, which literally means a deep idea, deep thing, right? And his commentary is stellar and often deep. That's his commentary to the Chumash. Right. So if you look in the top source, he says, why is this a question at all? Like Moshe, right? The Mishnah is Moshe's hands takes it as such an obvious thing that Moshe's hands don't win wars. Moshe's hands have done a lot of stuff, right? Let's go back to the plagues. Moshe's hands were actually pretty stellar. Right, and if you look in that, right, Moshe's hands split the sea. They did all kinds of wonders. Why does the Mishnah have a question? Moshe's hands are like, I mean, those are hands. Like people think Michael Jordan has good hands. Moshe Rabbeinu had some magic hands. Like he could do unbelievable stuff. Why is the Mishnah even wonder what's with Moshe Rabbeinu's hands? And he says you should look at my commentary to the Chumash. And there I will explain that the war with Amalek was b'derech hateva. It was a natural war. So what do you do when he says, look at my commentary on Chumash? You look at his commentary on Chumash, because that's the next step. That's where you got to go. So now you jump down to the bottom of the page where it says, Hemek Davar. And this I'll read inside because it's just 2 lines and it's very powerful. He says as follows, Vayomer Moshe el Yehoshua. Ratza Moshe Rabbeinu wanted laharot liyisrael koach hashgachat Hashem aleim. Right, he wanted to show the Jews the power of Hashem's divine providence, gam bli nes nigle, even without a open miracle, without the supernatural. Al kain sider milchamazu b'derech hateva. And therefore, he had this war fought in a natural way. And that's why he didn't send Moshe Rabbeinu. That's a good question, right? Moshe Rabbeinu goes to war later on. Why doesn't he send Moshe Rabbeinu? Why does he tell Moshe to send Yehoshua? Moshe's hands maybe are too powerful. Moshe represents the miraculous. We send Yehoshua because he's the natural warrior. He's the natural soldier. And then he goes on to say, and this is also very interesting. Hashem tells Moshe, right? Look at the next line. Right, that I'm standing on top of the mountain, and the staff of Hashem is in my hands. What did Moshe use that staff for? All kinds of great miracles. What does Moshe not put in his hands when he raises his hands?
The staff.
Staff. It's pretty genius. Right, that's why we call it Ha'amek Davar, because there is great depth. The Netziv is, I mean, not that anyone on the page is not genius, but special place in my heart for the Netziv. He says it's Yehoshua that goes to war, not Moshe, because Moshe's hands can't be involved in the war. He takes the staff with which he does miracles and wonders, and what does he not use? The staff, because this is a natural war, right? And now I guess he also sees like as an insurance policy, which is also kind of nice. We would be happy if we had that too today.
If things are not going well, he's got
Right.
the
He's
staff.
got
He
the
could figure out.
insurance policy. Right. But how do you win a natural war? He says you have the right kavana, but it's not in place. It's a natural war. Derech hateva means you better go and fight. You better put up your defense. You better get some offense ready. You have a war. And then you daven. And again, those are two great sources both the Yerushalmi, about, not about not having the tzitz, and Moshe, not being Moshe, not using the staff, sending Yoshua, specifically to teach us that that's how wars are going to be waged.
But Moshe still needs to raise his hands. It's not enough for us, it wasn't enough to just look at Moshe, see him on top of the mountain and be confident, or rely that.
Well,
it's
that was the reminder to David, right? That's the reminder to David. That's the rabbi who goes from the Hesda yeshiva to meet the guys, to give them chizik, to learn some Torah, to remind them what we're fighting for. But if they didn't need, maybe the Jews then needed Moshe Rabbeinu.
But it's more than just need, I mean, seeing him wasn't enough. He had to actually raise his hands in order to trigger.
Well, it's kind of like, guys, don't forget, right? Today we could do that with a WhatsApp group. We don't need Moshe's hands.
There you go.
If they're allowed to have their phone, don't forget God.
It's a kosher
Send.
phone and they can do it.
Send, right? But listen, we actually on this FIDF mission, we ended up in Har Herzl, and we went to, they took us just by happenstance to one section of the cemetery, and it was where Ari Zenelman, Hashem Yikom Damav, that Hashem should avenge his blood, was buried. His brother was just sitting there. We were schmoozing with his brother, and he was like telling us about Ari. Ari was a student in the Gush, so I saw some of the material about him because I'm on the mailing list. There was a famous picture of him learning the Rambam in Gaza like a week before he was killed. Yeah, he was. I mean, as they all were, seemed to be tremendous young men and women, amazing guys. I'm not sure where I was going with that story. Okay, anyways, sorry about that. Still jet lagged. I was going somewhere with that. I was going somewhere with that, I promise. Oh yeah, no, okay, right. So I mean, he doesn't need Moshe's hands. He's learning the Rambam in Gaza, right? People who were going in, who were davening. It could be that in the first war, they had to be reminded that this is what you do, right? They only knew supernatural war. Moshe was telling them and teaching them that there's another way to wage war, and that is a natural war. Don't forget the man upstairs, right? So that it could be that's what Moshe's hands are doing. We don't need Moshe's hands, but we do need to daven. We do need to. And we need to send money, and we need to have arms, and we need to have soldiers, and we need to fight. We need to do all of that, and all of that together, right? We hope that we are victorious, right? That evil is eradicated, and we can, right, have some peace that we so desperately need. All right, next Tuesday is Tisha B'Av. Not only can't we learn Torah, but I'm assuming nobody wants a class after Tisha B'Av. So we'll reconvene in. Yeah, I don't think I want to be teaching a class after Tisha B'Av. Although Rav Lichtenstein, before he went to eat after fast days, would go and learn Torah. Because on Tisha B'Av, he wasn't allowed to learn. So he would go and learn for an hour before he ate. But for the rest of us mere mortals, we'll go and eat and we won't learn. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks. Thanks everyone for joining. Have a good night.
Thank you.